Welcome to the 2021 Doors Open London virtual tour of the First Hussars Museum. This museum is located at number 1 Dundas Street in London, Ontario, right at the forks of the Thames, and is dedicated to the First Hussars Regiment, a cavalry regiment founded in 1856. We start our tour off in the 1800s room. The first combat that the Hussars would have participated in were the Fenian Raids. These were raids done by Irish-American Civil War veterans. They wanted to invade Canada, take it over, and trade it for Irish independence. This invasion mainly happened in the Niagara region. It failed due to a lack of manpower and the Americans blockading the border because they did not want to risk a war with Britain right after having the American Civil War. So the regiment mainly fought on horseback. Here we have what is known as a throat plume. It hangs off of the front of a horse in a parade. You can see it on this painting right here. This would be an officer's horse right at the front of a parade. Their first base was at the London Armories, which is now the Delta Armories Hotel. They also did training up in what is today Victoria Park. Back then it was the London Military Camp. They first started out just with sabers, no rifles in the 1800s for the Hussars. Hussars were mainly just for scouting. They would just be lightly armed and lightly armored. Only a little bit of chainmail on their shoulders to protect in a saber duel. The next conflict the Hussars participated in was the Boer War. This was in South Africa between Dutch settlers and British Commonwealth forces. At this time, the Hussars would have switched to more of a khaki green uniform and gotten rifles. They would have also used the Stetson hat. This hat is the same hat that the Northwest Mounted Police would have used, and the same hat that the Boy Scouts would have used, because the leader of the Boy Scouts, Lord Baden-Powell, was very impressed with the Canadian forces and used the same hat for his Boy Scouts. Here we also have another cavalry saber from the time, as well as a bayonet from a late 1800s rifle as well. This saddle would have also been used during the Boer War and during World War I. It was also pulled out for the memorial ride for the last 100 days of the war that the cavalry troop went on. And here's a London Free Press from 1898 or 1899 when the regiment were sent over. They didn't send the whole regiment over, but a number of soldiers did volunteer. The war was fought on Laurier's volunteer service rather than mandatory conscription. We continue our tour into the First World War room. The regiment continued as a cavalry regiment in the First World War, though through most of the war they served as stretcher bearers, served behind the lines, as supply troops, and served in the trenches dismounted, because cavalry combat really wasn't suited to trench warfare. However, at the Battle of Vimy Ridge, they did fight on horseback in scouting missions around the villages around Vimy, and fought at the last 100 days of the war. In the back corner here, we have a stretcher behind Colonel Leonard's uniform. It's Ibbotson Leonard. He was the commander of the regiment. We also have his dress uniform and a portrait of him. His brother Woodman was commander of an artillery regiment. We have his diary, and Woodman Leonard died during the Battle of Vimy Ridge. We also have a nice long panorama photo of the First Hussars before they went to Europe in 1915. This is at the Western Fairgrounds, where the racetrack is today. We also have a celebrity in the regiment, Billy Bishop. He's in the back corner, looking up towards the sky, which is very telling. He originally joined this regiment before transferring out to the Air Corps. There he is, in his Hussars uniform with his riding crop. And when he transferred out to the Air Corps, he gave his pocket watch to his commanding officer. We also have Christmas cards from the war, a bugle from a regimental bugler, and cap badges collected by members of the regiment. At the end of the war, cap badges were often traded between various regiments. We also have 2 German helmets from before they switched to the Stahlhelm, French Adrian helmet, and a Canadian/British Brodie helmet, wire clippers, and a device to put in barbed wire. You just screw that into the ground and then tie your barbed wire to the top. A gas rattle. You'd spin this around to warn of a gas attack. It would make a loud wailing noise from the air rushing through it. Bayonet from a Ross rifle. Binoculars and ammo pouches and a canteen. We also have artillery shells and a Quartermaster Sergeant Maddox footlocker. He used a Carling beer box as his footlocker. This is another connection to the regiment because John Carling donated his farm, which is now known as Carling Heights, to the regiment, and that's where Wolseley Barracks is today. We also have the London Free Press from when the war ended. And another picture of Billy Bishop looking very Napoleonic. He was known for being quite the rebel, and that's why he switched out to the Air Corps. We also have a small collection from things from the interwar era. The Hussars continued as a cavalry regiment right up until World War II started. They also served on the parade for the royal visit to London, Ontario, back in 1939. And in this period also did many cavalry shows and cavalry tricks at Port Stanley. This is the sign from the London Armories in the interwar era. It has a spelling mistake on the cap badge regimental motto. It says Hodi non Gra. It's supposed to be Hodi non Kra, which means today, not tomorrow. Hodi non Gras means today, not fat. We continue our tour into the Second World War room, starting with the London Free Press from September 3rd, 1939, the day that Britain and France had declared war on Nazi Germany. The headline, "Canada is now at war," was actually incorrect. Canada did not declare war until September 10th. We also have the London Free Press from VE Day, as well as a group portrait of the regiment on March 1st, 1940, in London, Ontario, shortly before they were sent off to Camp Borden later that month to begin training on their first tanks. Later they trained in England, and then went over on D-Day and fought extensively through the Northwestern Campaign into France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, and into Germany. The stuff down here is from the tank in Victoria Park, Holy Roller. That is one of 2 tanks in the world to make it through that campaign. It was very rare for a tank to survive that bloody campaign, as the Germans were firing these 88mm anti-tank shells at us, which could pierce right through a Sherman's hull. The only other tank in the world to do that was Baum in Sherbrooke, Quebec. We also have the Angel. This was on a Sherman tank, 2 Sherman tanks that the regiments had, actually. Though both crews from those tanks survived the whole war, despite those tanks taking many hits. We also have a picture of Bold here, and a little boot that was found in that tank. That was a tank that sank. It was a duplex drive tank, so it was amphibious. The screen could inflate, and then it could travel through water, and then deflate when it got onto the beach and use its cannon. That tank was discovered by a couple French fishermen who told the town's civil engineer, Leo Garapi, who was a member of the regiment, and then became the civil engineer in the town he landed at. And he told the Canadian Army, and they got it out with a few vehicles and mounted it at Juno Beach, and it serves as a memorial there. We have some captured Nazi items. A Stahlhelm and flag, as well as an Italian flag. Some members of the regiment did go over to Italy to witness tanks in action, as well as Brigadier Booth from the regiment. He was originally in the regiment and then ranked up and commanded a brigade in Italy before being sent back to the Northwestern campaign. We also have a couple German bayonets, a pouch with a Totenkopf and some belt buckles as well with Nazi iconography. We have a headset and microphone from a radio from inside of a tank, as well as the manual and a Morse code transmitter, as well as the radio itself. This was a troop commander's radio, so this would be a radio for commanding 3 or 4 tanks. It was made by a Canadian company. The rating is in English and Russian. These radios were made for all the Allied armies, including the Russians. This is a 75mm Sherman tank training shell. So the top is made of wood. They wouldn't want to waste metal for training. The chair here was also from Holy Roller. This is a tank suit. Sort of overalls to protect your clothes and underneath for when driving in the tank. You can imagine how horribly hot it would be in the summer of '44, driving through Normandy, wearing one of these in an un-air-conditioned tank. We have more trench art from the Second World War this time, a lamp made from a artillery shell, and a ashtray made from a tank shell. These helmets were for tank drivers. They were such a tight space inside of the tank, so you wouldn't want to bump your head, so you'd wear a leather helmet. This was a dispatch rider's helmet, and we also have an infantry helmet. The same as the World War I era helmets, but with a camouflage netting to reduce shine, and you can also put leaves and things for camouflage inside of it. The quilt up here, Corporal Jim Fisher, he captured a Nazi flag shortly after, I should say, landing on Juno Beach. And then he sent it home. And when he came home from the war, he found that his mom had cut apart the flag and stitched it to this quilt. And he told his mom, "That's very nice, but I'm not sleeping under it." She had left it on his bed, and there was no way he was going to be sleeping under the flag of the enemy. This is from 1939, shortly after the war was declared, the regiment marching through London in a parade to get more people to join up. We have here Brigadier Booth's Legion of Honor. Brigadier Booth was the highest-ranking Canadian killed in the Second World War. He was killed at the Battle of Falaise, so he got a posthumous Legion of Honor from the French. You have his medals here. He was originally in the regiment before ranking up and commanding a brigade. Have more medals here as well from Eric Shepard, who was also killed at Verrier's Ridge, one of the bloodiest battles in the regiment had participated in during the war. We also have the communion kit from Padre Creelman. It also has communion wine and communion wafers inside of there. A Mills bomb, it's the British-style grenade of the time. a Piat, which stands for Projector Infantry Anti-Tank. That was the main British anti-tank weapon. As opposed to the American bazooka, it was not rocket-powered, it was actually spring-loaded. There's also a bayonet from a Lee Enfield rifle, a pair of binoculars. The light up front, that light still works to this day, it just uses kinetic energy. Map reading tool, which is just a big magnifying glass and a compass. Bracelet for Major Duncan, that was his good luck charm. He was actually one of the drivers in Bold, and managed to swim ashore and survive despite the tank sinking. The sewing kit, they would call that the housewife. That was for sewing their uniforms and things. We have a medical kit as well. Gas mask. And some more medals. And this sword here. This is Corporal Jim Fisher's sword. He put it in his tank and drove through the whole war with this sword inside of his tank. So another sort of good luck charm. This would have been the general route that they would have taken in the war. So going up through the north of France, into Belgium, into Holland, crossing at Kappeln first into Germany and helping the troops cross the Rhine in February 45, but then moving back up into Holland and moving at the end of the war into the north of Germany. We continue with the post-World War II room. Volunteers from the regiment went on a number of peacekeeping missions as well as serving in Afghanistan and the Korean War. We have a picture of the Holy Roller shortly after it came home to London, Ontario. This is 1946. This is at Dundas Street near Wellington, right where the old City Hall is, and right near the old London Armories, which is now the Delta Hotel. We have a dress uniform from the 50s, mirrors the old combat uniform from the late 1800s, as well as other uniforms, the combat uniform of the modern era. We have a number of things in this case, including a George VI ceremonial sword and a swagger stick, as well as a radio for a Cougar armored vehicle general purpose, as well as a floodlight. Ron Janis's backpack. He was a corporal in the Hussars in the post-war era. He was also involved with the museum until he passed away in 2020. A M1 helmet. The Canadians were slow to adopt the M1 helmet and didn't adopt it until after World War II, unlike the Americans. We also have a picture here. This is when the Hussars met George Bush Sr. This was right after their deployment to Bosnia, which was the most dangerous peacekeeping mission the regiment went on. A number of Hussars were captured by Serbs during that mission. And moving on into the front foyer, we have the list of Hussars who died during the Second World War, as well as the battle honors listed beside it. A picture of the museum, or museum house, back when it was just a family home in the flood of 1937. Originally this house was just a family home, and originally this area was just family homes. It was built in 1881, and it is number 1 Dundas Street, so the first house on this street. By the 20s and 30s, the area became industrial, but the family here refused to sell out, and eventually the home was sold to the city on the promise that it remained a heritage property. And so that's why the museum eventually moved into here. We also have a picture of Colonel Conron. He was a post-World War II colonel, as well as a high-ranking officer in the Second World War in the regiment, and a teacher at Western after the war. He helped found the museum, along with Sam Pauley here, who was also a soldier in the Second World War. We have the Guidon. This is a regimental flag presented to us by Queen Elizabeth II. shortly after Canada Day in 1967. And a little display for our allied British regiment, the Royal Hussars, or the King's Royal Hussars as they're called now. They began in the Napoleonic era, and they are called the Cherry Pickers because during the Peninsular Campaign they rode through a cherry field and got their white pants stained red. And so that's the museum, or at least all I've decided to cover right now. The museum is open every summer, Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. till 4 p.m., and Saturdays 1 to 4, as well as it's open in the fall, 1 to 4 p.m. on Saturdays as well. Admission is free, so we encourage everyone to come down if they're in London. Thanks!